Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host, calling in from California. Daniel, good to have you with us.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you?
I'm doing fine and dandy, but there's a lot of very distorted things called truth out there that we'd like to talk about. And lo and behold, it's related to, COVID, it's related to the election, it's related to government. They fudge, and sometimes they lie to us. So we're going to talk about it. I want to start off with the vaccines. That's really big in the news because the markets, I watch the markets, and every time in the last 2 months there was a positive announcement, which was not an accident. Positive announcement, we're on the verge of saving the world. We have this new vaccine out, and the markets would go up a couple thousand points, and on and on. And it's still doing that. The markets are very dependent. I don't know if it ever turns out where the vaccine isn't quite as good as they expect, and we don't return to normalcy, or they wake up and say, hey, the lockdown is worse than the virus, which a lot of people are starting to say. Or if they wake up and say, well, the kids aren't doing well under these circumstances. But anyway, they're getting some vaccines out there, and Pfizer had a bit of a report that should be, looked at closely, because what I'm going to mention here wasn't some offshoot newspaper or somebody in conspiracy. It comes from some of the Pfizer, paperwork that they put out. First thing is, though, they do brag. The Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective. That is really good, I guess, but I think it's too early to tell exactly. But they did admit that they have one question that they're still asking, and that is, they're asking the question about the second shot, that they're expecting more side effects, and they don't know. And the truth is they don't know. That's one thing that we are aware of, because this is a propaganda event as much as a scientific. No, it's more propaganda than a scientific movement, and it's very political. But anyway, there's an admission that they want to give the second shot and see how it happens and how much side effects there are. But there's something going on in Britain, Daniel. This sort of blew my mind. I can't believe this is going to happen. That they're working with a virus that they can't identify clearly. They're working with DNA, RNA rather than DNA, and establishing the vaccine. And now that there's some few shortcomings of this, and they want to make sure they get the maximum benefits, they're talking about, if one does this a little bit better than this one, another one, well, why don't we just mix them and give them both together? Well, that sounds pretty wild, but the way I read it, that's essentially what they're talking about. But they're going to start that in Britain. But some of these whole problems with the virus did start, with some British reports. So who knows? It's not independent thinking and research is being done. It's a worldwide political event. So my first reaction, Daniel, to this is not super good news. Hopefully they can come up with a vaccine that is not dangerous, that you don't have to give it to kids, you don't have to have 3 or 4 shots, you don't have to mix the vaccine, and maybe this would be one way to cut down those who are most vulnerable. And surely isn't the kids. It's the people that are elderly and have other problems. So I think they have a long way to go before the dust settles and they decide how good this vaccine movement is actually going.
Dr. Paul, we're certainly not opposed to the vaccine, and if people want to take it, they should be able to take it. They should have an informed decision, though, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide an informed decision about it, and there are some things that are of concern. That second dose, as you point out, has an up to 4.6%. They call it serious adverse reactions, and those are highest among young people, according to these trials. What that means is that the young people who are virtually immune, and even Fauci said young people are not getting this virus, they're not getting sick. So young people that are virtually immune to the virus have a higher risk from the vaccine. Well, parents need to know that, need to understand that, need to keep their eyes open. And that's why we're looking at it and talking about it. And of course, the powers that be out there are very, very sensitive to any criticism of the virus, because that's supposed to be our savior. But we have to be able to discuss these things. And I'm not a doctor, Dr. Paul, as you know, you are. But it certainly sounds pretty weird in the UK that you're going to get a cocktail of several different vaccines. Hey, if people want to stand in line for that, that's fine. But what we're hearing about more is coercive measures on people. I think Ireland's already said you can't move around if you don't have it. They're going to be telling people they can't fly if they don't have the vaccine. So that's really our concerns, and I think they're pretty valid concerns.
You know, you brought up the subject which is instrumental, very much involved in understanding libertarianism, and that is we're not telling other people what they can do or can't do. And there's a word that a lot of libertarians use, and I use it a whole lot, and that's voluntarism. You know, what would a society be like if everything was voluntary with one rule: you can't hurt anybody? It wouldn't be very complex. I mean, we wouldn't have the government now. What part of our government writes the laws? Oh, that's the legislative body. Oh, sure. Not the bureaucracy, not the regulators, not the executive branch, not the judicial branch. Things are done in a voluntary sense, and but you can do things, anything you want if you come up. It's voluntary. But this is the way social things and medical things and economic things should be settled, and that means that you know, if there's a mistake to be made, and they've been made in the past. They were made certainly in 1976 with a vaccine, and a lot of people suffered from it. So it's when the aggressive individual who likes to exert authority, that can't stand voluntarism, you know, by the people, they're the ones who want to get in power, and we see them all the time. Every day we hear from them, and it sort of creates more at the local level. And they become very coercive, and they don't believe in voluntarism, and yet a lot of what we talk about and the concerns and the people that I think the discussion and the concerns about the vaccine is going to go on for a while. It's not going to be in a month or two. Matter of fact, this has been rushed faster than anything else. It has different technology, so it's not very conducive for saying that we're going to solve this problem in a few months or even a few years. They claim that some of the better vaccines that have been used over the centuries took years and years to develop, but this one was rushed through. So Daniel, I still have a lot of concern about what's happening with the vaccines.
You know, Dr. Paul, the other thing we wanted to talk about is the scare headlines, and I'm seeing them wall to wall out here in California. You wouldn't believe it. Governor Newsom had another press conference yesterday where he talked about the horrors of the hospitals filling up, and this is used to scare people. And we wanted to talk about the misuse of headlines, the scary headlines that are false headlines. And this is a great Twitter tweet from El Gato Malo. He's on Twitter, and we follow him. He does a lot of great work on this. He points out that the facts do not back up the headlines in this. And he talks about one headline he put in particular. This is a headline from a newspaper: hospitals in Idaho, Pennsylvania, Texas, overwhelmed by COVID-19 patients. And that scares people. If people know if they're going to be sick, they want to be able to get into a hospital. But the fact is, the statistics do not match up the headline. And he points out, for example, in Idaho, as of a couple of days ago, 57% of inpatient beds are in use right now. 14.6% COVID, 74% overall ICU use. And he points out, especially at this time of year, however, in the flu season, it's not uncommon to have 90% plus of inpatient beds in use. And in fact, 57% of beds is shockingly low. That's when hospital administrators start to panic, saying, hey, we can't pay the bills. And then he also points out even 100% is not necessarily full in ICU, because as per federal mandate, they have to be able to expand to 125% capacity. And in fact, they can go up to 150 to 200% capacity, which is actually what we have in Texas. The Texas Medical Center can really expand. The other thing, Dr. Paul, before I throw it back to you, is that he points out something that I don't think a lot of people who are not in the hospital business understand. And that is that hospitals are like airlines and hotels. They seek to be full. They go broke if they build too much capacity in a hospital and it's not being used. So they need to have those seats filled on the plane, the rooms filled in the hotel, and the hospital beds full for them to be able to pay their bills. So go down the line in that headline, and he basically cites statistics from the other states that are mentioned. It really doesn't back up the scare headlines that are really meant to inflame rather than inform.
You know, in the spring, we went through all this and all the complaining and the fear-mongering that was going on. And as the dust settled, there were some reports that, what they did, they scared the patients who needed care and they couldn't go. And the hospitals were empty and they were losing money. Some of the hospitals, and you pointed that out, Daniel, sometimes, it's up and down, and hospitals are, like a business, and some of them had to close. And the other day there was a story about a hospital. I don't know how prevalent this is, but they removed some beds, and it was a big hospital, so it was a bunch of beds, more than I imagined. They just took them out, and they took them out of the census, so to speak, and stored them someplace else. So all of a sudden, when they were 70% full, they became 95% full. It's that stuff. So you have to think, what in the world are they doing it for? What are they motivated by? Is it strictly to get another buck, and stir it up? But most people, when they hear these statistics, they don't always qualify exactly who's in the hospital. But most people end up thinking COVID, the virus is doing this. And then you all of a sudden see reports now come out, and there's hardly any flu people getting sick now. We don't have nearly as much flu. And another article the other day was there are less people dying from heart attacks. So this is just, where's a person out trying to, get the truth out of there. But it's very beneficial to those who want to benefit or serve their political interests or their economic interests by getting people very, very scared. And but an authoritarian society, opposite of the voluntary society, has to depend on fear. And I think they're doing a very good job. And when you look at the people and look at the kids and all, there's a lot of fear out there, and unfortunately they're going along with all these proposals.
On the same Twitter thread where he debunked all of these scare headlines, he put up a couple of other pictures of actual headlines in newspapers. And I'm going to read these two headlines. Hospitals overwhelmed by flu patients are treating them intense. The second one, California hospitals face a war zone of flu patients and are setting up tents to treat them. Sounds like us, right? Sounds like COVID. No, these are both from January 2018. These same kinds of headlines that were always happening, and we didn't freak out. We didn't close the country down. This is what always happens. So it's just interesting how the media plays up the same headlines, again, seeking to inflame, not to inform people. But, we wanted to move on to, Dr. Paul, to heroes and villains of the day. And here's one. I know you're going to want to comment on this. We talk about this a lot because I think this is what's going to break the stranglehold that the totalitarians have on the U.S. right now. And this is Chicago City Council member John Tunney, who's a Democrat. I know that's shocking. He was busted, Dr. Paul. He was running an underground speakeasy in his 3 restaurants that he owns. You knock on the door and say, hey, can we dine in? And they say, yeah, go in the VIP room in the back. Well, someone went in there and took a picture. They had the day's newspaper and they had the menu. They took a picture and posted it. And of course, like everyone else, like Gavin Newsom, like London Breed, the mayor of San Francisco, and all the others, they're only sorry that they were busted. His apology is a non-apology. I made a mistake and I'm owning up to it. Okay, great. What about all the restaurants that you put out of business and your mayor put out of business, and here you are secretly operating your own restaurant? It's pretty disgusting. So he's a villain, right, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, I have one bit of advice for movements like this, because we get excited about it when people say, "I've had enough, and I'm going to get around this. I'm going to defend my liberty. I'm marching ahead and doing what I would do in a free country." But I think we should encourage him to not require and demand a whispering campaign. I want them to do a shouting campaign and tell them, "Come in and feed." And there are a few doing that. There are some. You'll read a story about somebody who stood up to it, and they kept their churches open the whole time, and they had no proof that more people got sick at these places. And now we're seeing some of the silly stories about athletics and major football leagues that people haven't gotten sick, even though they fudge some of those figures and say, "Close them down, nobody can go." So it's a difficult problem, of course, but I think speaking easily and getting around it to get your liberty one way or the other, I think is fine. But I think also ultimately we have to be speaking clearly and loudly and persuasively that liberty is better than the coercion and voluntarism is better than force. There, Daniel.
Well,
go ahead.
We did villains, though we need to have heroes. And so the hero, I think, is the Board of Supervisors of Campbell County, Virginia, Dr. Paul.
Oh, yeah.
They voted to declare that county a First Amendment sanctuary. And they call on the sheriff's office to refuse to enforce or assist any official, federal or state, in enforcing unconstitutional orders. That is the Board of Supervisors, County Supervisors of Campbell County, Virginia. They said, "No, you cannot violate the Constitution. You can't lock us down. The sheriffs can't enforce it." So that's also a very good sign, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, this is fascinating when you think about it. How long have this sanctuary problem been existing? For a good many years, and the left does this because they can get federal money and run their welfare programs, and then they lock them down. You don't arrest anybody for breaking the law, and you get the money from the federal government. It goes on, and the city gets destroyed, and they come back and there's violence. Oh, well, we spend too much money on the police, and on, and they participate in this total destruction, and then they participate in fraudulent elections and who knows what else. But I think it's interesting now. There's a sanctuary for liberty. Isn't that fantastic that people decide that they want to have just be left alone and take care of themselves, and they want to have you come there. First Amendment rights, they're going to protect us. And here, if you look at the social media and regular television, the newspapers that don't exist anymore, I mean, there's no real determination to protect freedom of speech. But I think it would be really, really ironic and very much fun to watch if all of a sudden the cities became a sanctuary for liberty.
Yeah, indeed. And it's nice to see the pushback against Virginia's really authoritarian governor who's driving that state into the ground, especially the rural parts of the state who really don't have any problem with the coronavirus. But I guess moving along, we have kind of a potpourri today, Dr. Paul, and we wanted to talk a little bit about Admiral Brett Giroir. And he was written about by our good friend Jonathan Turley, who had a great piece out today about this. He's a 4-star admiral. He's a pediatrician, widely respected, and he's a member of the coronavirus task force. And he broke ranks with Fauci and the rest of them. He's Assistant Secretary for Health in the administration. He went on Fox and he said there is no evidence or science supporting lockdowns like they're having now again in the state of California. And he said that this is interesting. He said that neither Fauci nor the rest of the task force members have seen, quote, any data that says you need to shut down outdoor dining or outdoor bars. The science, he said, does not support it. So when Fauci goes on TV yapping about how, oh yes, follow the science, this is what it says, he's blowing the whistle. He's saying there is no science the task force has seen that supports these kind of radical lockdowns that are coming around again.
I don't think the answer has to be that you have to speak loudly. And I think the Admiral here set a good example, speak clearly. Tell them what you believe in.
Yes.
Because I think that has more good results than the idea that a shouting match goes on, sometimes what you hear on television. But that's not what the Admiral was doing. He was talking softly in the sense of factual information, and that is what's necessary. Ultimately, it's the conviction of ideas that makes the difference, and the people who have run our cities, they have had deep convictions. Give them credit for that. They believe real sincerely in authoritarianism, socialism, welfarism, fascism, and all the things that lead to this type of an operation. Bankruptcy means nothing, and actually, I'm always disappointed that the alternative to this hasn't been, handled a little bit better by either political party, because instead of saying deficits can be harmful to everybody, eventually it leads to some very bad results, and you end up everybody going poor in a country like Venezuela. But we don't hear too much of that. Philosophically, the people just speak louder and louder in order to get power, and then they have to distort things in order to make sure they stay in power and get to save the country, because everybody who goes to Washington will save the country because they're better managers. They don't want to go to Washington because they understand what personal liberty is all about. I think this Admiral had a fairly good understanding of what it would be like if individuals had more responsibility for what's going on.
And he does make a good point that, and we've made it before, Dr. Paul, that this is not March, this is not February. We know a lot more about the virus than we did. So why are we turning to the so-called solutions in March, like lockdowns, that didn't work then? There's no science to back them now. If you remember people like Jennifer Rubin, who writes in the Washington Post, she said, Trump wants to open the schools only because he wants to kill children. She actually literally wrote that in the Washington Post. And of course, now we know that even Fauci said kids aren't getting it. The schools should be open. So we're learning more about it, yet they're doing the same old things that didn't work back in the spring. And thank goodness that the Admiral is standing up and saying, hey, you don't get your own science. The science doesn't back what's going on here.
Right.
But I guess we want to move on to our final topic, Dr. Paul, which is what's going on where you sit and where I reside, the great state of Texas.
Right.
Pretty exciting developments there.
Yeah, the Attorney General is busy. He's filing a suit, and sometimes he gets involved in some legal things that stirs up a little bit of a debate. But this one, if you're for liberty and you want to solve some of these problems, what they're doing now, I think, sounds pretty good. But they're filing a suit against that's going to include Georgia, against Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in the United States Supreme Court. Now you say, well, that doesn't sound right. Why should Texas have anything to say about these different states? Well, the whole thing is it has to do with the election laws, the things that they have done in these states, which sets a precedent on how elections can be grossly distorted, and how people who may no longer be living or living in this country are still voting, or sometimes they vote 2 or 3 times. That's what they're talking about. But let me just read a short paragraph. This case was just filed today, the way I understand. It says, the 4 states exploited the COVID-19 pandemic to justify ignoring federal and state election laws and unlawfully enacting last-minute changes, thus skewing the results of the 2020 general election. The battleground states flooded their people with unlawful ballots, applications, and ballots while ignoring statutory requirements as to how they were received, evaluated, and counted. So this is not a Texas issue. This is a generalized freedom issue on how we run our federal elections, and it might be an argument for changing the system a little bit and not inviting so much of this to happen. But I think the point is, it's well taken that the case should explain this, and they should answer to this. Did this happen? See, a lot of people say, oh, that's just hearsay. There's no proof. Of course, they can't get into court and do it and get the proof. So they should, I think right now, it seems like so much is in the public domain. Well, if you don't think this is so true and you think this is all distortion, somebody who says No, this never happened. Let me show you how we watch this and we prevent all these problems, which there's not too many in the country left to believe it. Even the people who operate with it and depend on it, which has been going on for years and years, they're not going to fight it if it serves their political benefits.
And the point that's made by the Texas Attorney General is a valid one. Texans voted a certain way, and because of abnormalities or cheating or what have you in the other states, the outcome is not reflected accurately. And here are the three main points that he makes in the lawsuit, which is in the U.S. Supreme Court by design. Unconstitutional changes to election laws. They weren't made by legislatures as the Constitution demands. Unequal treatment of voters within the same state. And we know in some areas of these different states, they were allowed to have Republican poll monitors. Other places did not allow them. And the third one is voting irregularities, quote, consistent with the unconstitutional relaxation of ballot integrity protections, the signatures and such. So it's very interesting. One of the things in the filing itself, Dr. Paul, that caught my attention was some statistics cited by Paxton, the Attorney General, about, remember, we went to bed on the night of the election with Trump pretty comfortably in the lead in these states, and we woke up with a complete turnaround in favor of Biden. Well, this cites a PhD in statistics who makes the following point, Dr. Paul: the probability of former Vice President Biden winning the popular vote in the 4 defendant states, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, independently, given President Trump's early lead in those states as of 3 a.m. on November 4th, 2020, is less than 1 in a quadrillion. And the chance of Biden winning all 4 and surmounting the deficit that he had was 1 in a quadrillion to the 4th power. So it's pretty much a statistical impossibility, according to this PhD cited in the court case. So it'll be interesting to see if this goes anywhere.
Right. There's under the circumstances today, our government is too big. There's too much money involved. There's a lot of power, and it's all at stake, and it's all auctioned off, at the elections. So we can change the rules, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem. We have to change the philosophy of our government. As long as our government is this big and both parties engage in the way the money is spent and whose ox is getting gored and all these things, and the people who love the power, it doesn't really solve the problem. And yet we were so far removed from what was intended by the Constitution. This case is not going to solve it, but it might call attention to more and more people to realize what is going on, and it's not going to be solved by merely, okay, we need more poll watchers. Yeah, that's not going to quite do it either. We have to get rid of the incentive, the powerful incentive to spend these billions of dollars now to get their guy in office because they pass out the money. But even in this process right now, of the mess we have with the correction from the financial bubble created by the Federal Reserve, plus coronavirus, and plus the danger and the problem with the lockdown, with all that, what are they doing? There's only one thing: more money, more debt, and that's not going to work. So this is in the middle of it all. And there should be some baby steps in the opposite direction. That's why we point out a couple of these, at least saying, I want my liberty back. I want a sanctuary city. I'd like a sanctuary country, for that matter, to where we can live in peace and quiet and take care of ourselves and assume responsibility for ourselves. That would be the kind of society I'd like to live in.
Indeed. Dr. Paul, I would just close very briefly by thanking our audience for having patience in this unusual circumstance of doing the program like this. Our viewership was up yesterday for the show, and we appreciate that. We know it's not ideal. We're doing our best to provide you with the news and analysis in these circumstances, and I look forward to being back in the studio with Dr. Paul soon and back to normal. But in the meantime, really deep felt appreciation to all of our wonderful viewers.
Very good, Daniel, and I have to just reiterate that that's exactly where my sentiments are. And I know there's a lot of sentiments that are shared because we're growing in numbers and more people are joining us and listening to us. And we are getting more calls and references because, our approach is somewhat different than others, and we try to be independent because that's what we need, and try to take a step away from the politicization and also the false notions of the philosophies that we have lived with for basically 100 years. I mean, I think the founders of this country were discredited and ignored for over 100 years, and that's when we had a different monetary policy, different fiscal policy, different spending policy, different foreign policy, all these things, and we're living with this. So there's very, very little offer in Washington to say, we have to change the system and get rid of the motivation to do what's going on right now. And that is a job. But that's where I think we make our inroads. I think there's quite a few organizations now. They feel like they're small and insignificant. But I'll tell you what, if you start with one, it always spreads. And that is the job of our viewers. If you do agree with us, help us out. Reach out to other people and tell them there is a different way and there are answers, and we don't have to just throw up our hands and give up. People go through, and our country's gone through problems like this for a long time. So the information is available. We know what a free society is like and what the rules ought to be. We just need to get a lot more people enthusiastic about following those rules. And the rule is very simple. Just don't hurt anybody. Just don't steal. And things would be a lot better. Take care of yourself. Be responsible. And that's so simple. And you say, oh, the world will fall apart. I won't have anything to eat, and on and on. Well, most of the problems that we describe is a result of the system that we have now. So you have to sort it out. Are the problems that we have a consequence of nature or the role of government, or is it the policies of our government and the policy of the politicians? And I think it's easy to figure out that there's a philosophy that we have followed and we need to change it. And I thank all of you for joining us frequently to go over these issues. And please come back to the Liberty Report soon.